from NBC News, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. After the early arrest of Timothy McVeigh, the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing has turned, as investigations so often do, into a tedious process of following thousands of leads, piecing together fragments of information. It was just 1 week ago. All the days seem to run together, don't they? It was just 1 week ago that the bomb exploded. So today at 9:02, a moment of silence. Tonight, it does appear there's more to tie McVeigh to that bombing, but the second suspect still is on the run. Here's NBC's Robert Hager.
Terry Nichols, a key figure in the case, says Timothy McVeigh told him 3 days before the bombing that something big is going to happen. The dramatic quote was revealed by a prosecutor as Nichols appeared before a judge in Wichita, Kansas, late today. The prosecutor said Nichols told the FBI that McVeigh summoned him from Kansas to pick him up in Oklahoma City 3 days before the bombing. On the drive back, Nichols said McVeigh told him something big is going to happen. Nichols claimed he asked, "Are you going to rob a bank?" and that McVeigh only repeated, "Something big is going to happen." Nichols also said McVeigh told him, "If I don't come back, go clean up the shed," a storage shed where authorities believe explosives were kept. Authorities said Nichols did clean out the shed after the bombing. So far, McVeigh is the only one charged with setting off the bomb. At Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City, a grand jury has already begun hearing evidence against him and issuing subpoenas for those with more information. The base is being used because the federal courthouse here is a mess after the bombing. More on McVeigh's getaway from the blast site to Perry, Oklahoma, where he was stopped by a state trooper 90 minutes later. Authorities have now driven that route and found it took them exactly 90 minutes. From the length of the drive, agents theorize McVeigh made his getaway directly from where the bomb was set to go off, and that his car must have been parked nearby. A handwritten sign found later left in McVeigh's car saying "trouble with battery cable" suggests one way he might have managed parking the car. Meantime, the FBI said of the still missing John Doe number 2 that he may not have a foreign accent, as some have said. He may have no accent at all. And in upstate New York, McVeigh's father and sister Jennifer were escorted from their home by FBI this morning to be brought to Oklahoma on word they'd try to get McVeigh to cooperate with authorities. McVeigh is being held in isolation in a glassed-in cell where authorities can watch him. Today, a judge declined to move the case out of Oklahoma City and declined to permit McVeigh's court-appointed attorneys to withdraw from the case, which means tomorrow he'll be brought before that judge for an emotionally charged appearance not far from the city where the bombing occurred. Robert Hager, NBC News, Oklahoma City.
And today, as the funerals continued, so did the digging out and the remembering. NBC's Roger O'Neill has been there from the beginning.
At 9:02 a.m., even the rescue work stopped for the moment of silence. When the silence ended, the awful task of finding death resumed. But with some better news, the medical examiner today said instead of 15 to 20 missing children, now he thinks there are only 5. This just as searchers finally broke through a wall to the daycare center.
With 2 children recoveries that we have in the pit area itself inside the building, we've obviously gotten down to one section of the daycare center.
When the building collapsed, the rubble pile at the bottom became a jungle of 9 broken floors of concrete, steel, and bodies. The pancake continues to be the hot spot for searchers. Floors 9, 8, 7, 6, and 5 have been lifted off the top of the pancake now. From the basement, searchers continue to be slowed by broken 3 by 4 foot thick columns of concrete.
They come in with jackhammers, and they have the heavy equipment. Those obstacles are removed, and the crews are right back in.
City engineers have begun assessing other damage, and it is extensive. $500 million so far, they think. A military plane shot photographs of buildings in the blast area this afternoon. 8 square blocks around the federal building are still off limits. It's the FBI crime zone. But outside that, officials know 8 structures have collapsed. 9 have been tagged as dangerous with structural damage. The total number, 221 damaged by the bomb, mostly glass, in a 1 square mile area. Officially, the death toll stands at more than 90. Other bodies have been found but haven't been removed from the building. More than 100 more are still to be found. As each body is identified, the medical examiner is tying ribbons onto a young redbud tree, a symbol, he says, for eternal life. The reality of death, however, continues with at least 8 funerals today. Roger O'Neill, NBC News, Oklahoma City.
NBC's Pete Williams covers the Justice Department. He's been working on this from the outset. Pete, why do they think Oklahoma City?
No one is certain, Tom, but one clue may be that Timothy McVeigh was obsessed with the federal raid on the Branch Davidians at Waco, Texas, and some of the first agents on the scene were sent from Oklahoma City, from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. ATF had offices on the top floor of the building. None of their agents were among those killed in the bombing. Another reason may be that it was a target that allowed a quick getaway. The federal building was close to a highway on-ramp, and that led to 3 interstate highways, so those who planted the bomb could get out of town quickly without having to thread their way through traffic, Tom.
All right, thanks very much. Pete Williams in Washington tonight. When we come back, the president's plan to fight terrorism at home. And when NBC Nightly News continues, guns and the government. I'll be talking with the leader of the NRA, Wayne LaPierre, and meet some of Oklahoma City's 4-footed heroes. President Clinton today declared Oklahoma City a federal disaster area. That will make it eligible for a wide variety of aid. The president is getting high marks for his handling of this bombing. According to a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, an overwhelming majority, 84%, approve of the way the president's conducted himself so far, and his overall approval rating, now 50%. That's up 4 points in just 3 weeks. For the president today, a strategy meeting with congressional leaders and solemn duty at a funeral service outside of Washington. Here's NBC's White House correspondent Brian Williams.
The Oklahoma City bombing touched the president personally with the death of Secret Service agent Alan Witcher, who up until his transfer to the Oklahoma City office a few months ago was among the president's personal bodyguards. A 19-year Secret Service veteran, Agent Witcher left behind a wife and 3 children.
Alan Witcher was surely a blessed man. Blessed in family and friends and in commitment to his country.
Later, the president summoned congressional leaders and laid out some new initiatives the White House wants tacked on to an existing bill, all to prevent terrorism.
We can prevent it. We must do everything we can to prevent it. I know that we will do this together without regard to party.
Among the items the president is asking for, 1,000 more federal law enforcement personnel, making it a federal crime to kill any federal employee, and a study of how common goods, like fertilizer, can be made inert or non-explosive. Late today, the congressional leadership emerged from the White House, giving at least tentative approval to some of the anti-terrorism plan the White House wants.
We should move as quickly as we can, but be certain that in the process we are very careful about not trampling on anybody's constitutional rights.
But I believe you're going to see a bill go through here that will be vastly bipartisan and will address these issues in an appropriate way.
The White House will find out soon if public approval of the president's handling of the bombing so far is shared by members of the House and Senate as well. Brian Williams, NBC News, the White House.
We have more reaction tonight to the Oklahoma bombing from across the country when our NBC poll asked if people think this was an isolated incident or the beginning of a major increase in terrorism in this country. About half said they think a major increase is on the way. Now to the front lines of the fight against terrorist attacks, agents of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, themselves now targets under fire. Here's NBC's Gwen Eiffel.
Federal raids, there we are.
It wasn't so long ago that prohibition agents were heroes. They were the untouchables, the enemy of moonshiners and criminals everywhere. But then there was Waco, flames, a botched rescue, 4 agents dead in the single bloodiest raid in the agency's history. Now the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is the target, as some gun owners charge that it is intrusive, violent, and unconstitutional. This was the scene in Washington last week on the 2nd anniversary of the Waco fire.
The ATF and the FBI violated all 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights.
On the day of the Oklahoma City bombing, the National Rifle Association has led the charge to abolish ATF with advertising that charges intimidation, abuse, and stormtrooper tactics. The Bureau, which has an annual budget of $375 million and 4,300 employees, is searching out guns, not criminals, critics say, a conviction that fuels the anger of militia-type groups now linked to the Oklahoma bombing.
The ATF to the NRA is the very embodiment of this government tyranny. And then they're telling people that they have the right to be armed against that government tyranny.
The ATF has had its successes, most notably its investigation of the World Trade Center bombing. But the White House does not want to escalate a war of words with the NRA while the Oklahoma tragedy is still so fresh. They think they can win a fight with the NRA, but later. Gwen Eiffel, NBC News, Washington.
So what is the reaction of the NRA to all of this? Joining me tonight is the NRA's Executive Vice President, Wayne LaPierre, who is in Washington. Mr. LaPierre, in a recent fundraising letter, you referred to the ATF agents as jackbooted thugs with the power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, destroy our property, even injure or kill us. Isn't that the worst kind of exaggeration? And doesn't it only add to the climate of fear in this country?
Tom, I think there's a lot of overblown rhetoric, and I think we could all lower it a little bit. I mean, let me say the NRA has members out there in Oklahoma both as victims and rescuers, and we deplore the situation. I think what you have to look at, the NRA in '94, January '94, joined with the American Civil Liberties Union, joined with the National Association of Defense Attorneys in asking President Clinton to appoint a presidential commission to look into federal law enforcement excesses. Not just one or two cases, but many. Now, nothing happened. We went down to the White House in January of '95 and again had a meeting asking for a presidential commission to get all this out in the open. If NRA is exaggerating, if the ACLU is exaggerating, it will be shown to the entire country. But if we're telling the truth, which we are, the American public needs to know about these abuses before we get into a discussion of expanding federal law enforcement powers.
But do you think that the American public knows that there are already 1.5 million assault weapons out there that were manufactured before the ban, an untold number that have been modified only slightly, and that handgun manufacturing in this country is more than twice what it was just a couple of years ago? So if you want a gun in this country, it's not so hard to get one.
But I really don't think that's the issue. The issue here, there are a number of issues. One is what we're talking about are federal law enforcement abuses. Now, if that's happening, it ought to be looked into and corrected. We're not against law enforcement. We're for law enforcement. Believe me, one of the strongest organizations in the country that's pro-law enforcement. But the abuses need to be looked into. The function is legitimate. We all want criminals with guns prosecuted, believe me. But when abuses are occurring against honest people, they ought to be stopped.
What do you think is more...
That's what's fueling the paranoia, I think.
What's more dangerous to the American system, the ATF or the state militias around the country?
Believe me, the NRA has nothing but contempt for hate groups, terrorist groups that masquerade as patriots. We have no contact with those groups. They represent nothing about the NRA. If they advocate force, if they advocate overthrowing the government, we've had a resolution on our books since 1964 against that. But when there are federal law enforcement abuses occurring, they need to be dealt with. The other issue we need to do is we need to protect our freedoms. The worst thing that could happen in this debate is if we end up killing the Constitution, killing the Bill of Rights, then the terrorists and the bombers will have won.
All right. Mr. LaPierre, thank you very much. That's a debate that we know that will be going on in Washington probably later than originally scheduled as a result of what happened in Oklahoma City. Another important note tonight on guns from the Supreme Court. The court today struck down a federal law that bans guns within 1,000 feet of a school. The court said only state or local governments could enact such a law, and 40 states already have. When we continue tonight, we'll have an NBC News investigation on Timothy McVeigh, a portrait of the suspect. 1 week after the explosion in Oklahoma City, there are so many questions. One of the most puzzling, Timothy McVeigh himself, if he is guilty as charged, what led him to do this? What experiences, what ideas? There is a lesson in his life for preventing this kind of terror, is there? NBC's Bob Faw.
We know he just turned 27, that he grew up in small-town America, Pendleton, New York, where his parents divorced. He went to Mass often. At Starpoint Central, played basketball and ran track. So quiet, so ordinary.
He was such a nice person, and you just wouldn't dream that he could do something like that.
So we know some details, but we hardly know him. Don't, for example, know if he changed in Operation Desert Storm, where he won a Bronze Star and other decorations.
He was a gunner, so he
He basically shot down anything in his path.
Officers praised him. Give him a target and it's gone, said one. Fellow soldiers saw something else.
Everybody in the unit thought he was a nut, because all he talked about was weapons, going to war, killing people.
Returning to Fort Riley, Kansas, he grew bitter when he got hurt and couldn't get in Special Forces. Off base, he started spending time with paramilitary groups and started sounding paranoid, accusing the Army of planting a computer chip in his backside. That's when he also began to stockpile ammunition.
He was going to send it home, and that by the time he got out of the military, he would have a very nice little nest egg of M16 ammo.
Discharged, he joined fellow soldier Terry Nichols at Jim Nichols' farm in Decker, Michigan, where neighbors saw them explode crude bombs, heard them make threats.
They've got plans to eliminate the government.
McVeigh visited Waco, he watched the standoff, and he was enraged. And when the compound with its women and children was devoured by fire, McVeigh, too, seemed consumed.
His hatred was fanned by extremist pamphlets and tapes.
This is a beautiful and wonderful country, or maybe I should say it was, before it was taken over by murderers, liars, and thieves.
McVeigh also felt the country had gone to the dogs. In a 1992 letter to a Lockport, New York newspaper, he suggested blood need be shed to turn the country around. What, he asked, is it going to take to open the eyes of our elected officials? Still unmarried and a loner, he drifted to this Arizona trailer park, where he is remembered as quiet, neat, and nearly always armed.
I was a very nice young man, basically. And it's very shocking to think somebody has such a deprived mind.
So we know very little. We've learned he is no longer John Doe number one, that indeed he looks just like one of us. But we still don't know why a shy, church-going youngster could possibly turn so much stone, steel, and humanity into a charnel house. Just as we don't know how much hate is growing now near other scrubbed farmhouses in other trailer parks. That is, how many others there are just like him. Bob Faw, NBC News, Washington.
When NBC Nightly News continues, the latest demands of the Unabomber.
Oklahoma City, target of a deadly act of terrorism. Who's making these bombs? Why are they so easy to get? And can we do anything to stop it? A Dateline NBC investigation tonight.
There was a bizarre twist today in another big bombing case, the Unabomber, who is suspected in Monday's blast that killed a California lobbyist. Today, the New York Times and one of the bomber's victims released letters police say were sent by the Unabomber himself. In the notes, he claims he speaks for a group seeking, quote, the destruction of the worldwide industrial system. He said he would stop the bombings if a major publication prints one of his articles. The New York Times said it might do that if the article has journalistic merit. The Unabomber, named for universities and airlines, his first targets. They are more than just man and women's best friends in Oklahoma City. We'll tell you why when NBC Nightly News continues. When something like Oklahoma City happens, there are so many teams trained and ready to go. Of course, most are prepared for natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, or airplane crashes. But if it's a bomb, the object is the same. Find the survivors fast. NBC's Mike Betcher tonight tells us about who's best at that.
This is about the pursuit of happiness, a dog's happiness. But canine contentment has been elusive since last Wednesday at 10 p.m., the last time a survivor was pulled from the ruins. Search dogs are trained to find the living, but there has been no sign of anyone alive.
They get overwhelmed just like people do with the smell of death all around them.
If you own a dog, you know that they exhibit a lot of emotions. Some people might disagree whether they are human emotions. They don't cry or laugh, but they do exhibit those emotions. And in this rescue, these dogs have run the gamut of emotions.
Oh, here's a dog. No doubt about it. He is my child.
Hunter is 3 years old, one of 24 dogs from 6 states now involved in the search. He and his handler, Bruce Spear, are part of the Puget Sound search team of Washington State. This is his first mission.
Dogs are just like people. When they are around deceased subjects, it depresses them.
When Hunter finds someone alive, what does he do?
He will find the subject and start going like this.
And when he finds the dead?
He'll stay in the area, but he will not bark. He'll get depressed. ears may come down, and he's just not a real happy dog.
There is, however, reward.
Good dog. I want to be able to help any families that don't have a body to bury. It's real important.
Still, there is that chance that Hunter will bark, a sign of